It's the land of French kings, queens, castles, and conspiracies. Today, we follow the path of saints, greats, even the Mona Lisa. It is time to get curious about the Loire Valley. Remember when you were a child and all you asked was why? Well, I never quite outgrew that whole quest for knowledge phase. In fact, I've made a career out of asking who, what, where, why, and how as an arts and travel journalist for the past 20 years. So, if I have an insatiable curiosity about the exciting, inspiring, beautiful world of art, architecture, and hidden history all around us, I bet you do too. This isn't your typical what to do on a vacation travel show. Oh no, this is your all-access pass to a deeper understanding of the world's great art and architecture, people and places, history, and how did they do that. So, come along on our educational journey, our field trip for grown-ups who have never quite grown up, and learn on Curious Traveler. There is a region in central France known as the Cradle of the French. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and there are more than 300 beautiful chateaux, all in one small area. Why are they there? Well, it has a little something to do with kings, wars, wine, women, and song, the French Renaissance, and a couple of trips to Italy. The Loire Valley has so much to be curious about. Here's what I'm curious about in France's Loire Valley. Why are there so many fairy tale castles in one small area? Why is there a tiny city up here? Why does a river run through it? How did this castle save a man's life? What does the Mona Lisa have to do with this castle, and this one, and this one? Is that the secret she's smiling about? So, question number one, why are there so many castles in one small region? There has to be a reason why this area has these and no other place has them. What is that reason? So many chateaux. Because at the end of the Middle Age, the king was no more in Paris, lived there in the Loire Valley. So where is a king, there is a power. And when there is a power, you have money. So at this time, there was no more war in the Kingdom of France. So the taste was to live in a palace, very luxury, very comfortable. It's why you have so many chateaux in the Loire Valley in a very small space. This peaceful and prosperous time period was during the Renaissance, but the Loire Valley's origins go back much further, where sometimes the answer to history's mysteries is simply food and water. The Loire Valley is known as the Cradle of the French and the Garden of France because of its fertile soil. And you know how the French love their wine and cuisine. So, fertile soil and close access to the water of the Loire River and its tributaries meant little civilizations popped up here millennia ago. Fast forward to the early Middle Ages, when the villagers built protective fortresses high upon the hills, you know, to keep an eye out for the bad guys. Little did they know that just a few hundred years later, these Disney-esque fairy tale chateaux would be built atop their fortresses' ruins. And once the kings moved in, the nobility soon followed, building their own chateau. Gotta be close to kiss up to the king, right? But where did this iconic French Renaissance architectural style come from? You definitely know a French chateau when you see one. Wait, it is French, isn't it? We think of this as true French architecture, but in fact, it actually came from Italy or was inspired by Italian.
The kings and all his people of his court discovered Italy and the Renaissance. So they wanted to have it, and copying it was not enough. They invited the artists to come to France.
So let us begin our curious exploration of the Loire Valley Chateau with the grandest granddaddy of all the chateaux, Chateau de Chambord. The Royal Chateau de Chambord is the largest castle in the entire Loire Valley, with 440 rooms, 84 staircases, and 800 sculpted columns. It is also known for its distinctive roof line that is completely symmetrical. Or is it? Well, we do know for sure that King Francis I loved the arts and pretty much wanted to show off by building this giant castle in the 16th century. Mission accomplished, as Chateau de Chambord is 6 times larger than any other chateau in the Loire Valley.
Wow!
So grand, such a statement of the king's power, such intricate carvings by only the best French master masons. The only problem is King Francis never actually lived here. Nobody ever actually lived here?
That's right.
How can that be?
Because it was built by King Francis I to show that he was the greatest man on earth.
Ah, so a lot of showing off, but not a real practical use.
That's it. There are many towers, so that was a sign that the person who built it was somebody important.
Next, why was this location chosen? Well, believe it or not, all this grandeur was built to be a hunting lodge of sorts, which also explains all the land and forest surrounding Chambord. Back when the rich and famous would go hunting on the weekends instead of golfing. I still don't know which is worse. In addition to a hunting lodge, the royals also hosted legendary soirees here.
Quelle belle fête!
So the architecture had to be impressive. The style is a unique mix of medieval, Gothic, and Renaissance. There's 4 massive bastion towers connected by a protective wall that creates a giant keep. But who needs a medieval wall during the time of Renaissance peace?
Well, we are at the time of the Renaissance when it's built, but Francis I apparently liked everything that had to do with what we now call the Middle Ages, knights and fortresses. So the castle is in fact a fortress of the Middle Ages with ornament which is typical Renaissance.
The most interesting architectural features are up on the rooftop, with a mishmash of towers, chimneys, and spires facing every which way, no two exactly matching. It's almost like its own little cityscape up here. And inside, leading up to the rooftop, there's another marvelous curiosity. One of the most impressive pieces of architecture is this double helix staircase. We actually have one helix on one side, one on the other. They wind around up 3 floors and never touch. It would take a genius to design this, right? Well, that is why it is believed that Leonardo da Vinci did this. That's right, the Renaissance genius himself. And one of his masterpieces has a curious connection to Chambord too. There's a wonderful story about what happened here during World War II. Obviously, war is never anything to smile about, but there was a little sneaky trick played on the bad guys here.
Yeah, in fact, in different places in the Loire Valley, all the pieces of art from the museums of Paris, well, not all of them, but a lot of them, were taken away and sheltered in some of the castles here.
They were hidden away here, so when they went to the Louvre thinking they were going to get all the masterpieces, quite surprised. Yeah. And one of those masterpieces was none other than the Mona Lisa.
Wow!
And before the Mona Lisa was brought to Chambord in the 20th century, she was brought to our next curious chateau in the 16th century, on the back of a mule. While Chambord's location was chosen for its hunting grounds, our next chateau is the perfect example of a Renaissance castle built atop an ancient Gallo-Roman fortress on a prime hilltop lookout point over the Loire River. This is the beautiful Chateau d'Amboise, named after Louis Amboise, who famously in the 1430s was caught plotting against the king. In fact, he was even scheduled to be executed, but the king says, "I will spare your life on one condition. You gotta give me that pretty house." That's exactly what happened, and thus began the royal history of Chateau d'Amboise as a royal residence for the French monarchy. A rough start to what became the home to a long line of French royalty.
The center of the kingdom was here in the Loire Valley, and the king's family lived here for more than 1 century.
Wow. And symbols of these royal families are everywhere. You just have to know where to look. All throughout the chateau, you will see this symbol, which most people know is the fleur-de-lis, and of course, the symbol of the French monarchy. But what is this next symbol? And then we have this symbol as well. This is known as the minx tail and is the symbol of Brittany. But why is that there? Our last clue is behind us once again. And here we can see the two symbols coming together. If you see the coat of arms above the fireplace, that's the fleur-de-lis to represent Charles VIII when he married Anne of Brittany, with the minx tail there on the same coat of arms. This is because in 1491, not only did they get married, but their two powerful kingdoms came together. Nice wedding present, huh? And of course, this is what marriages were all about for those Renaissance royals: important political alliances and expanding that kingdom. Whether you two actually enjoyed each other's company was irrelevant. The perfect example is Henry II and his wife, Catherine de' Medici. They lived here at Amboise while his mistress lived in another Loire Valley castle. Ooh la la! That could not have been comfortable dinner conversation. King Francis I grew up here too, and later became known as the King of the Arts. He loved the arts so much, he invited the star of the Renaissance arts world, Leonardo da Vinci, to be his royal artist in residence.
Francis I was proud of himself. So he had an obsession to be a king for the history. And it's why he invited Leonardo here in Amboise, naturally, because Leonardo at this time was a very, very famous artist.
Of course. And there's a wonderful legend that there was an underground tunnel built between Chateau d'Amboise and Leo's house.
The tie between Leonardo and the king was very, very strong, but it was not a secret. So why to use a tunnel to come to the chateau? It was not necessary. But it's very nice to tell a story now.
Well, secret passageway or not, Leonardo da Vinci's house is just a short walk away through the little village of Amboise. And connected to Chateau d'Amboise is this chateau, Chateau de Clos-Lucé, where in 1516, the King of France, Francis I, invited none other than Leonardo da Vinci to come live here. Leonardo said, sure, but I gotta bring my stuff. Of the three masterpieces he brought, one happened to be a little painting called the Mona Lisa. That's right, he brought it here to Clos-Lucé on not horseback, but muleback. Seriously. Hard to believe, but the most famous painting in the world was transported here for miles from Italy on the back of a humble mule.
Mamma mia.
Hope Leo bought that extra shipping insurance. When King Francis invited Da Vinci, he said, come to Clos-Lucé to be free to think, to dream, and to work. Why? What was wrong with thinking, dreaming, and working back in Italy?
He had to face his best rivals, such as Michelangelo and Raphael, and Leonardo didn't receive any orders corresponding to his status. Leonardo was relegated to a position of secondary importance, and all these reasons explain his coming to France in 1516.
Da Vinci was an engineer, a scientist, a philosopher, and of course, an artist. Today, you can see many of his genius inventions come to life. These are all modern-day 3D models, taken from Da Vinci's original sketches, for everything from early military tanks to an aerial screw to an incredible flying machine, centuries before the Wright brothers took flight.
Leonardo was an exceptional man, the genius of mankind.
Leonardo da Vinci only lived 3 more years once he moved to Clos-Lucé, and fittingly, when he passed, he was laid to rest back at the small chapel next to Chateau d'Amboise. Now, there's a legend that says Da Vinci's remains were later removed and reburied somewhere else, but that's a curiosity for another time. Now, we must move on to our next chateau, the Chateau of the Ladies. Chateau de Chenonceau is known for many reasons. Its exquisite architecture, the fact that there's a river running through it, and not the least of which, it is also known as the Castle of the Ladies. That is because between the 1500s and the 1800s, a whole slew of ladies, from queens to noblewomen to mistresses, ooh la la, all put their stamp on Chenonceau. And it all starts with our first lady of Chenonceau in 1496, who built a French Renaissance castle on top of an old watermill.
Her name was Catherine Brissonnet.
Okay.
Her husband was a banker.
Okay.
Who had built an old fortress, knocked it down, and he built his castle in the style of the Renaissance. Then he made mistakes with his business, so he lost his castle and the castle became royal.
But a very interesting type of royal castle. King Francis I owns it, but he's too busy working on Chambord. So his son, King Henry II, gives Chenonceau to the woman he loves. Nice gift, eh? Well, the only problem is that woman just happens to be his mistress, Diane de Poitiers, not his wife, Catherine de' Medici. While Catherine was none too pleased, apparently Royal Society had no problem with this little arrangement. Diane becomes one of the most influential women of France. She gave grand parties and expanded Chenonceau over the river.
And she wanted to cross the river to go hunting.
Of course she did.
Of course. So swimming and so on is not good. So she built a bridge across the river.
But Diane's fun came to an end in 1559 when King Henry II died. Now Catherine de' Medici could finally take her revenge on the other woman. And she did the worst thing one woman could do to another. No, not make fun of her hair. She simply kicked Diane out and moved into her castle.
There was a bit of a, I don't know how you can say, between the mistress and the wife of the king.
One can figure that one out, okay? A little bit of a tiff.
Catherine of Medici became the lady of Chenonceau, and she built the gallery, the double gallery, on top of the bridge.
So that's the good news. Catherine de' Medici didn't destroy the mistress's castle. In fact, she made it even better. She added these glorious galleries over Diane's bridge and added gorgeous gardens and courtyards too. Next, from the keep my man but give me the castle queen to the White Queen. When Catherine de' Medici died in 1589, she gave Chenonceau to her daughter-in-law, Louise of Lorraine, known as the White Queen, who liked to hang out in the Black Room. When Queen Louise's husband was assassinated, she went into a deep depression lasting years. She rarely left this Black Room, so why was she called the White Queen? Because back then, the traditional color of mourning clothes for French royalty was white. But we gotta end on a happy note, so let's fast forward to the Age of Enlightenment, when yet another lady of the castle swoops in to save Chenonceau.
In the 18th century, we had Madame Dupin. She came from Paris. She lived here 70 years. And her guests were all the famous philosophers and writers of the time, like Voltaire, Rousseau, Montesquieu, and so on.
Madame Dupin not only restored Chenonceau to its former glory, she was even able to protect Chenonceau during the French Revolution, while other chateaux were being ransacked. How? Well, she was able to convince the revolutionaries that her bridge was the only way to cross the Cher River. And according to legend, it was also partly because the revolutionaries liked Madame Dupin's friendship with the Enlightenment crowd.
Hooray!
So this humble watermill became a true cradle of the Renaissance and later the Enlightenment, flourishing with new architecture, new gardens, and new ideas, even if it bubbled over every so often with a few female feuds.
Mine.
While Chenonceau was clearly the ladies' castle, our next curious chateau, the Royal Chateau de Blois, has a bit of an identity crisis. It looks like 4 separate castles in one. Chateau de Blois started in the 10th century. Joan of Arc came to Blois to be blessed, and counts, dukes, kings, several Henris, a couple of de Medicis, and Francis I all lived or visited the royal castle.
All of the 7 reigning kings in the 16th century resided here on a temporary basis. So it's undoubtedly the chateau where the court was the most often present in the Loire Valley.
And some of those royals even did some redecorating, including a rather prickly one. All throughout the chateau, you will see not a bear, not a lion, not even a fairy tale unicorn. Instead, you will see a porcupine. Why is that there? Well, it is because Louis XII adopted the porcupine as his own personal emblem. Seems a little strange, but think about it. A porcupine can throw his own quills out at the enemy. So the idea here is don't get too close to the royal power and enemies better stay away. This was all part of the Order of the Knights of the Porcupine. Other orders of this time period included the Orders of the Yellow Ribbon, and the Orders of the Belt of Hope, and the Orders of the Broomcod. What the heck is a broomcod?
Yikes!
Now, onto a bigger curiosity. Where can you read the history of 4 great epochs of French architecture from the 13th through the 17th century, all by standing in one courtyard? Well, right here at Chateau de Blois. The first castle began in the 9th century, just a simple fortress to protect from Vikings. Only a few remnants of that castle remain, but the 13th century expansion is still here and is still glorious. This is the magnificent Salle des États Généraux, the largest and oldest civic hall in all of France from the 13th century. And this, of course, is where the kings and queens would hold their magnificent festivities. And as you can see, all along the ceiling, we have the magnificent fleur-de-lis, the sign of the French monarchy. The next wings are from the 1500s, Louis VII's Gothic wing with that brick facade and, of course, his equestrian statue and porcupine over the entrance. And Francis I's Renaissance wing, said to be inspired by the architecture of the Vatican. And in the center is the grand spiral staircase.
You could walk out to the balconies, see what's happening in a busy courtyard and like a theater setting, especially see who's in the staircase.
That's very important. Okay, so some royal secrets could be overheard here, but King Francis also added a royal library and this room called the Chamber of Secrets, long before J.K. Rowling wrote a book called that.
It's the only royal study in France that's kept its original woodwork.
Amazing.
So you've got 237 panels here. They were referred to as a cabinet à secret, which means 4 secrets if you'd like. So when the king would come here, for example, with an ambassador, I'm going to show you part of my collections, and you would come into an empty room, and where are the collections? You'll find them, they're in the walls, but you have to find the access.
Oh my gosh, little secret panels. Legend has it that this is also where Catherine de' Medici would hide her poisons. But there was nothing secret about the 4th and final wing of Chateau de Blois.
In the early 17th century, Louis XIII's brother Gaston of Orléans had a rather important project in mind to totally rebuild the chateau.
Why completely rebuild a perfectly good castle? Well, you know how kings can be. But Gaston's greed got the better of him. When the future Louis XIV was born, Gaston was no longer heir to the throne, so he lost his fortune and his big castle project went unfinished. And today, it just adds to the incredible 4-part French history lesson that is the Royal Chateau de Blois. So, a giant castle fit for a king, although never lived in by one, with a mysterious double helix staircase, perhaps designed by a Renaissance genius who lived in his own Loire Valley chateau, that may have been connected underground to yet another chateau, which a king wanted so badly he threatened to kill the owner to get it.
Yikes!
And in that very castle lived a king with his wife, while his mistress lived in another castle. Ooh la la! Where a river literally ran through it. And we finally end at a 4-winged castle for an art-loving king with yet another superb spiral staircase in it and a porcupine or 2. Thank you for joining us on our educational journey, and hopefully now you're even more curious about the who, what, where, why, and how of the beautiful Loire Valley. As they say here in France, à bientôt!
about to say, it looks like you had no hand when you had the.
Oh, still, okay, sorry.
It's okay. Still rolling.
3, 2, 1.
Yeah.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good job. Round
That's
of
very kind of you.
applause. Round of applause.